the topic is about the new research agenda of UNESCO Man and Biosphere program. But to look at that, we need to first go a little bit back to the history of the MAB. And I will speak about the basically two phases, the first 20 years, then the second 20 years, and where we are now, 4 days after. UNESCO Man and Biosphere program was initiated by the 1968 UNESCO Biosphere Conference. The full title of the conference was the International Conference of Experts on a Scientific Basis for Rational Use and Conservation of the Resources of Biosphere. That was a bit earlier, and actually as the kind of a bell ringing for stimulate the academic communities to move for the international cooperation. That is about the same time of this first UN. A few years later, the first UN Conference on Environment. The program was established in 1971 in order to seek answers how humanity has been affecting the biosphere and what could be done to avoid further degradation. This mission, I think 4 decades ago, remain there and valid today. The MAP program is participated by more than 150 countries and governed by a MAP national committees, national commissions, and a MAP council. For this year, in Yohoping, we are going to have the International Coordinating Council of the MAP program for the first time, I think, in Sweden. It's a great honor for UNESCO for MAP, but I think it's a great opportunity also to hear from the excellent research institutions, groups from Sweden to shed some light for the future of the MAP. We have the secretariat. I'm the secretary, very honorable position. And we have a team. Mariam is with me, and we have people working in Paris, about 10 people, and some 10 colleagues in the different field offices. And of course, we are not doing this alone. With the Stockholm, the Center of Resilience, we have the MOU that Thomas initiated in 2008, and with many UN agencies, UNEP, FAO, IUCN, WWF, CI, we have a broad partnership in many places. Man and Biosphere program has been a long-term, a collective and dynamic international effort with aim to develop a basis within the natural and the social sciences for the rational use and the conservation of the resources of biosphere and for the improvement of global relationship between humankind and the environment. This is the overall statement. However, this vision is going to be re-examined. That I think we have started the process. Later on, I will mention that we have started this process to talk about the new MAP strategy, including the research agenda, and we invite all the MAP national committees to give the new ideas about this, because this one, the message was very nice, sound, but it may somehow difficult for the ordinary, the people that to understand what it is. Now I show this painting, which is from the early MAP publications on the part of the session on mountains, the mountain research. When I first came to UNESCO, I opened this book, and Man Belongs to the Earth, the Mountains. Oops, I saw a Chinese old painting from Qing Dynasty, which featured very well what UNESCO MAP has in mind. It's not about the forest, mountains, glaciers as such. It talks about the relationship with the people. I think that's quite a nice picture. I want to mention some names of those who within UNESCO has done extraordinary work. They basically lay out the foundations for the program. The Michel Baptiste, the French the scholar, and he has been a long time serving lifetime and in UNESCO as the Assistant Director General for Science. And he was behind the main Biosphere program initial inceptions, and also they participate very as one of the central person for the convention of the World Heritage Convention. That is a very influential instrument. And of course, he put a lot of ideas about the formulation of Biosphere Reserve as a world network. Francesco Di Castri is an ecologist, and he has been there as a Secretary of MAB for quite some years. And in 1980s, he was the one who pushed forward this concept of ecology in action. There are a series of working groups and publications coming out at that time in 1980s have a very good impact for ecological research work. And later on, he was leading the UNESCO contribution to the to the first Rio conference in 1992 as the coordinator. And this photo showed Michel Baptiste and with other Di Castri, with Malcolm Hadley, that is from UK. He is retired now. He is one of the chief editors, long-term researchers in UNESCO, especially on the tropical forests and the soils. On the right side, Bernd von Drost is the former secretary of MAB. He's the first director of the World Heritage Center, which you know the UNESCO work in the World Heritage has generated great impact, and he put a lot of thought there. On the back, the Gisbert Glasser. He is the former ADG for Environment in UNESCO, and is still active now in ICSU, and other names. From 1971 to 1992, this is what I think is the initial phase, the 20 years of the work. MAP was mainly focusing on the research on the ecosystem and the natural resources. Of course, it's a human oriented, that the relationship on human impact is related. But if you look at the initial research themes, they are more or less dealing with a different type of ecosystems. MAB has 14 research subjects from the tropical, subtropical forest ecosystems, the land use management, but in the forest landscape, the impact of human activities and the land use in the savanna and the grassland, in arid, semi-arid zones, the ecological effect of human activities in the lakes, the marshes, rivers, aquatic ecosystems, tundras, mountains, and some early important publications. There's big volumes of, this is not UNESCO alone, but MAB, UNEP, UNESCO, FAO has been doing, and some research, IUCN, there are a series of publications about the basic things, the tropical forest ecosystem, vegetation of Africa, the natural resources in different parts of the world. There, from 1970s, 1980s, there are a series of important publications. And then come to the 1980s, early 1990s, that this is, I think, the Institute of Landscape Ecology in UK, together with the MAP Secretariat, came up with 25, 26 volumes of MAP books about the different part of ecosystem and the management issues. Now, the research teams also go to the other part, like islands. But number 8, I'm sorry, it's not very clear. Number 8 is about conservation of natural areas and of a genetic resource, genetic material they contain. This subject, number 8, later on became the world network of biosphere reserves. That the MAP was started in 1971, and this one, the biosphere reserves in 1976. That was the beginning of the network. And of course, there were some subjects like the pesticide, the pollutions, and so on. They are not so much developed in the later stage. The 14 project, I think 7 or 8 were very active, the others are less active. The urban ecology was actually very active. This is the book by the professor von Hessler, that from Germany, about the modeling of the urban ecosystems, urban ecology. And there are a project, that's where I start with the UNESCO, this ecological research cooperation project in forests, the urban ecosystems, and the heavy metal pollution in China. That is one of the UNESCO map project. And some other publications on the shifting agriculture, the aquatic ecosystem, etc. Now, globally, MAB has made a lot of achievement. First is advance the new development concept, that is the economic social development cannot ignore anymore the ecological carrying capacity. I think the MAP research project has put forward a lot on this notion. And the series of studies on major ecosystem types and the topics, land use change, land-water interface, and so on, has enriched a lot of the global knowledge for the ecosystem management. The launching of the World Network Biosphere Reserve in 1976 become very strong and become a very powerful network now. The interdisciplinary research connecting science with ecosystem management in Biosphere Reserve become very active. And of course, UNESCO as the catalyst in capacity building also provide many opportunities from the institute, the centers, the training courses in different places, including for instance, the Dresden training course. That's why this morning we're talking about your research training program. We're very interested to see if there's a possibility to work together. Now, in 1992, there was a evaluation, ICSU scope evaluation to MAB. And it made the assessment to what MAB has achieved, what was its strengths, and about the weakness. Without going to the details, but what it suggests the MAB to phasing out many of the research program, the 14 project, but shifting its focus on the maintenance of biodiversity, the environmental sound management development, sustainable development, and the rate and the extent of global changes. That was a very timely signal to my program. And then for the ecosystem types, it's just to focus more on the coastal zones, islands, and urban development. That was 1992. And using particular biosphere reserves as the framework for cooperation. I would say that at that time, not all the recommendations were well taken. But if we look at that back now, 20 years after, then to see the evaluation, I must say the scientific community gave a very good recommendation to MAB. In any case, what has happened is this is the second period, 1994 to 2014. Now, a strong development, that is very much in line with the scope, the recommendation. Empower, develop the biosphere reserves. That is strong development on biosphere reserves has been happening. The site-based approach, that the biosphere reserves as so-called learning laboratories for sustainable development. This three basic functions and the biosphere reserve for conservation, for the development, and for the research and the capacity building, education, and so on. This is a system has become more appreciated by the member states. And of course, this goes with the cause of the global movement toward to find the solutions on sustainable development and to find the modules, new modules. And the cover page, this is the first action plan of Biosphere in 1983. This is developed in the Minsk, UNESCO, UNEP developed this, the action plan for biosphere reserves. The idea, that is to connect the site globally on the similar type of ecological systems or social systems, that to have the comparative studies in order to understand what is going on in the biosphere. And of course, the Madrid Action Plan that has moved much forward. Now, if you see the the Seville strategy in 1995, and some of you may have been there in Seville. It says that to use the biosphere reserve to identify and conserve natural and cultural diversity. That was the only system that put forward, not talking about biodiversity as such. Biosphere reserve is for cultural diversity as well. And then use biosphere reserve as a module for land management and offer approaches for sustainable development, and use biosphere reserve for research, monitoring, education, and formulate a global network. And there were some 90 recommendations developed, very important, by the scientists from 104 countries put together, and not only scientists, but the practitioners and site managers, and the 6 recommendations for national and site levels. And the Madrid Action Plan moved further that to carry the ideas of the Seville strategy, which are supposed to for the 21st century, into the more concrete actions. I will not go to the details, but what will happen? What has happened is that we see the new form of biosphere reserve become developing. This is the Jeju Island Biosphere Reserve developed in 2003. Jeju has been a very interesting place for a number of reasons, for the industrial development, the transportation, agriculture, for tourism as well. But then they become interested in a biosphere reserve because the island development has come to the point they wanted to find a new niche in national development. What the future of the island should be. At the beginning, the local communities, the government, more look from the economic aspect, but eventually they realize actually the natural the component, the ecosystems, the Hara Mountain, the coast zones, the river systems, and the marine sanctuaries and the geological features, and has a lot more interest for research, for education, for economic purpose. And so this become one of the sites. First come a biosphere reserve, then they have the geological component become a World Heritage. Then they are now developing a number of, there's a password.
Just step on.
Yeah. Right, thanks a lot. So the Jeju, for those who are familiar with the conservation, you know that this has become really the Korean model for the integrated conservation and development. The IUCN have the Congress there, and they are really pursuing a very interesting the integrated the conservation into the development. I think that for this year, the World Park Congress, they wanted to present a case that how the conservation has been, multi-international destinations has played a significant role in the island ecosystem like Jeju. The biosphere reserves now have some maps, later on I can give you, that have the 621 sites in 117 countries, including 12 transboundary sites. This every year that is coming, the member states are raising the request. 2013, there's 12 new sites was included. And this year, we have just had the advisory committee, 2014, 28 proposals coming. So it's quite a significant increase. The examples of biosphere reserve, which show the different cases now, like the Marais Haute-Marois in France, is the site, it's a wetland site. With the, it's not a typical traditional, the conservation natural reserve as such. It has the wetland, the communities, agriculture, and the city all included into that nomination, because they see the connections of the conservation with the local development has to be together. Another one from Korea, the Chang Biosphere Reserve, which is quite big, the coast, the wetland, but also have the mountains over there. It's also the, how to say, the area, as you can see, the Chang is have the site have 14 towns and villages, including the biosphere reserve. Economic activity to the site, including ecotourism, organic farming, and salt production. And the reason that they get this site into biosphere reserve is to promote, to find a new niche for the local economy, in addition to the wetland conservation. Now, if you look at the figures from the before the civil, the proportion of biosphere reserves on this site, you see the core areas, the conservation components, was much higher, 50%. And then the buffer zone, transition zone are much less. The transition zone is 29%. And after civil, that the site, the core area, the proportionally, where the site number has been increasing, the proportion of the conservation, strategic conservation area has reduced. And significantly increased are the buffer and the transition zones. This shows the biosphere reserve is increasingly regarded as an economic, social, ecological development module, rather than just a conservation module. This is a very interesting development. Like the French, the Delta de Horn Biosphere Reserve, and many of the cases has renewed their nomination and asked for expansion. The expansion of the ecosystem is more on the managed and developed, semi-developed areas, like this case. So many of the biosphere reserves has increased the buffer and transition zones. Some of the new map publication in more recent ones. But this is biosphere reserve, but there is also research like the scope evaluation saying that we should phase out many of the themes. But on the dryland management, marginal dryland management, there's research has been going on, continuing. Like this project, which lasts about 10 years, with involving most of the dryland biosphere reserves to see how that integrated the management can be carried out. This is in countries of Bolivia, Burkina Faso, China, Egypt, India, Iran, Pakistan, Jordan, and Tunisia. That in the MAP Council, this you're hoping, there will be a launching of the policy brief from this project. You will see the result from that. Now, MAP Research Agenda 2014 onward. If we look back this 40 years, we see it's in the first 20 years more the ecosystem type, the themes. And the second 20 years are more expansion on the site, the horizontally, in a different type of the learning laboratories that have been included in the network. But now we have the new context. The Millennium Development MDG is ending very soon. The UNESCO has also finished its Madrid Action Plan last year. There's all of you, I think, involved in one way or another on the shaping of the new Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. What will be there in the big agenda is biodiversity, the food, water, energy, climate change impact, etc., etc. No matter how the document is shaped, but these are the fundamental challenges, and the social inclusion, equality, human rights, and so on. So what should we do for the map? Where is the future? Now, we have just we sent in March to all the map national committees, national commission, map national committees, an invitation for asking the opinions. That this first round of presentation will be in, you're hoping, the feedback. We got some 30 countries now responded. We have invited countries to give us ideas about the new vision and mission statement for MAP. We ask the countries to look at the key issues, international process and strategy, the goals that MAP should be connected with. What will be the new services as intergovernmental scientific programs? And the number 4 is about the 4 new future research agenda. Of course, we talk about other things, but this one is critical. It's critical because as intergovernmental scientific program, if we don't have a leading cutting-edge agenda, then there's no need for intergovernmental program. So this letter, we have sent reminders. We hope that we will come soon with the presentation in June, and that will give another year to further discuss this. And I hope that probably several working groups will be established to look into the specific agenda, into the future research. Now, one thing is about, this initial, what the initial ideas have been there is, this is just some of that. About the green economies, there's a lot about the discussion about green economies, green growth, green development, green cities, and so on. So this is greening in economies and societies that connecting global agenda to local context. Biosphere reserves site. That seems one subject that we may explore. How to enhance the ecological integrity, the transboundary issues, big transboundary issues within the country, watershed-based, between the countries, and so on. The future of conservation regime. What will be the future conservation system in the future? And then what about, I like very much the concept, the notion of the resilience and this one. Talking about the limit, the capacity to recover, and the thresholds. But we need to see, perhaps there's also the other element that in terms of rebuild and redesign for the future. This is particular this very intensive the process of the rural-urban integration, the changes. Maybe we should also explore that, not just look at what the natural capacity is, but then we can help the natural also to come back with something. And then there's a regime shift that this will be very relevant to that. And then managing the changes. I think I will skip this, but you're familiar with the difference of the notions on the green growth. The World Bank is about the monitoring, the investment things. The OECD talk about the government regulations. The UNDP is talking about the investment as well, where UNESCO is talking about something different that I will come to that. But the Katba Archipelago Biosphere Reserve in Vietnam, which this case I was involved in the development. Next to Calab, this is the Haiphong province. Next to it, there's famous Halong Bay World Heritage. And when initial nomination is Halong Bay and Katba as a World Heritage altogether. But the IUCN evaluation say no, Katba, no. Because there are too many people there. There's a development issue, fisheries and so on. No good. So Halong Bay was nominated and accepted by the convention. Then we come map. We look at it, we say, no, it's not necessarily the presence of the human society in this ecosystem is not necessarily a bad thing. It has been lasting for many centuries, very productive agriculture and fishery, and the people living in harmony with nature. And so the Kataba then become an interesting case of biosphere reserves. Now, if you are talking about the green economy versus the green and blue economy, that I think that's one particular case to look at. The Altamaha Biosphere Reserve, which I mentioned before, the French one, has been suffering, the community has been suffering because of the decline of the traditional agriculture, legume production. Now the EU has put 12 million euro package to help that biosphere reserve communities living there to come back with the new development, science education, tourism development, etc. So it's a very interesting module. This is the traditional land use. Then they also, of course, want to promote the green, the bio products as such as part of local communities. Private sectors and many of the industry, forest industries, traditionally are considered as producing bad things for the forest and so on. But there's a change also that this is Indonesia that we have been working with the private sector that has been doing a lot of logging and forest industry business, and then they start investing in biosphere reserve. This is the first case in Indonesia going beyond the government and driven by the private sector. This is the forest, wetland, very degraded land. But here they are very interesting in the degraded ecosystems. They're still very important about diversity. This is the smallest freshwater fish, the species, a new discovery, no longer new, but it's some years now. 7 millimeters, the adult fish. Very interesting the discovery in that degraded ecosystems. So we have been thinking that is that secondary forest, degraded for secondary forest, 80% of Indonesian forest is degraded. Is that correct to say that biodiversity in the secondary forest or degraded ecosystem is less interesting or less dynamic, less important than other ecosystems? Not necessarily. I think CI also, WWF, CI have some research in the Irian Jaya and very interesting studies. So we should not, this will come to the issue that if we, in the future, the biosphere reserve development, we should not probably focus on the pristine forest and beautiful, ecosystem. Those are affected may also have a very important value. But what we brought in is that from this very complicated, messy management situation into a coherent and simplified the zonation of conservation, buffer zone research, and local development zonation. So UNESCO, Madame Bokova, the Director General, says that genuine sustainable development calls for more than green investment, low carbon technologies. Besides its economic, ecological dimensions, the social and the human dimensions are central factors of success. Ultimately, we must focus our effort in building green societies. That, I think, is where Biosphere Reserve map is following. Of course, the technology is extremely important. Investment is important, but we have is a society in mind. And I think this is very much in the resilience center that you also look at the societal changes, because without that, we cannot make it a success. Now, there are a few comments about the future conservation, the system. You remember this, this is from De Castries' time, that 1980s. Open the box for the conservation. Conservation should not just protect, wrap it up, and no disturbance. And in fact, it's impossible. So this kind of open conservation system has been the notion in the map. But, well, we have seen a great increase of numbers, all kind of protected areas. Worldwide, I think there are internationally recognized 160,000 sites. It's enormous. And many countries set up 20%, 15%, some countries even set higher percentage of the land for devoted conservation. But is this the way we will continue? Are we reaching to the limit of that? I think that is very interesting. For MAP, we hope that we can have a new discussion about where the future conservation should go. And should conservation become a mainstream in the development agenda? Now, I show this photo, that's from Vietnam. Outside Ho Chi Minh City is a huge mangrove site. It's a dumping site for the bombs, during the war. That because after mission, the airplanes came back, they dumped all the bombs there. There's a resistance in the forest, so the orange agent was spread and to destroy this land cover, completely destroyed. But the Vietnamese people and the government has worked 30 years to bring this back, continued replanting, rehabilitation, and so on. And it now come back with 70,000 hectares of 72,000 hectares mangrove site. And this is a biosphere reserve. It is the first biosphere reserve that is recognized by UNESCO from a completely destroyed and recovered ecosystem. And when we push forward this, we thought a lot about that because usually we don't, this is not the case. It's not supposed to be the case. The species are changed. The species, I think, has 80% as before, but they are introduced also. But after all, this is the most important ecosystem near this mega city, big city of Ho Chi Minh City, is the recreation area for the people over there. And it has the functioning of the producing the, the forest products, and even fisheries now start working. So we believe the Kanzhou Biosphere Reserve gave a very interesting new thinking in the future conservation system. Bring the natural back by the human effort is possible. It's actually happened for that. And this Sahavula Biosphere Reserve from China, the area is in Inner Mongolia has been suffering with degradation, overgrazing, and so on. That's why I'm interested in this PAXI, the project. I hope that one day you can have one case in Inner Mongolia, because what has happened is that they made the biosphere reserve. They say, okay, conservation itself for them is the development. So by limiting the grazing agriculture, their economy is not going down. Their economy actually going up by quality products, and the natural recovery was very fast, enormous. Once you limit the activities, change the agricultural production from tradition from the normal grazing into the collective intensified agriculture, with a lot of scientists, researchers help them to increase the quality of the and productivity. Then the natural come back very nicely, rather than planting in this dryland steppe area. That I think is very interesting, because the values of rehabilitated ecosystems and the process and of rehabilitation are both important, and this has to be reflected in the future of a MAP program. And the French, he was a chair, right? Jacques Weibel, French MAP, and says the whole thing about this discussion about values, because the conservation is about the science, but it's about the values too. But the values, how you can put the values correctly. Once you move beyond the tangible calculation of the timber, the species, and the productivity, etc. Once you come to the values beyond the ecological and social, then become very complicated. So this is a very nice word, and see, the values is something that made of what you cannot be sold, and cannot be given. So it's talking about the significant human values in the conservation. And this is two maps showing, one is from Sikkim, the Himalaya, the Little Kingdom, another one from China. That the traditional drawings about their mountain system. And they are separately, have no contact in the history as such. But you see how similar they are actually. That is the spirit, the belief, the way they consider their mountains in their life are actually very, very close to each other. And this is the Taishan mountain in the eastern part of China. And this is the Sikkim, is the kingdom in Himalaya region. So this traditional belief and uses, I think there's, we were talking about the traditional knowledge, indigenous knowledge, is very important in today's management. And we would like to very much to see this continue to be an important component of conservation. And very often that we say, oh, this is a natural system, let's put the protection there. But most of them, the truth is that most of these sites are actually managed already by centuries, if not 1,000 years. And they belong to someone. We simply do not know. And we introduce new systems quite often. If we ignore this traditional indigenous people's knowledge and practice and right, we will make a huge mistake. And that's the lessons continue being learned. And this whole thing, a notion about the poverty, quite often is a narrow concept that we calculate in terms of the economic income. We ignore completely the interdependence of the local community over there and the benefit that they got from their environment systems in terms of food, in terms of water, in terms of the good living environment and so on. So this has to be changed. Now, lastly, I want to say something about the integrator of ecosystems vis-a-vis the fragmentation. That from the MAP program, we have seen this kind of patterns that in close to the borders, so-called border, national borders or provincial borders, that the conservation ecosystem are treated differently, just because there's an administrative line somehow on the map. And this has resulted into the problems of cross-border, the pollution, forest fire, illegal practices, the poaching, etc., etc. And Biosphere Reserve in Europe has developed a number of cases like a Tatar Mountain, Carpathian Mountains. There are several cases. And the new one that in the Danube Delta, the river in Europe, and there are in African cases. There are quite a number of cases. Now countries want to look at this connected system because continuously the ecosystem are blocked, are fragmented. And because what is happening here in the steppe area is because of the new marketing economy component and the privatization that has been leading to this kind of practice, and then blocking the traditional migratory ways, being the birds or the other fauna species, and result in very, very tragic situation. The case like what we did in China, the giant panda cases, the Biosphere Reserve and the World Heritage nomination, that has worked for 20 years to bring back a big corridor and a cluster of the system, which connecting 14 different sites, enormous area now that for the general habitat. It's less for this particular flagship species. It's about all the ecology and the social system connected to the area. But otherwise, we only see scattered pockets here and there, and there is no connectivity. We have identified in the work in Asia the number of biosphere reserve possibilities for transboundary cooperation between Russia, Kazakhstan, Mongolia, and China, as this is the Dalai Nur and Altai Mountain Range. Germany is also involved in the Altai Mountain Range initiative. And the big river initiatives like in Africa, the Lake Chad and the Mekong River basin. It's very difficult subject, very, very difficult subject. But we hope that in the map future that we can look at this, the upstream, downstream, the connectivities of this ecosystem. Especially the riverine system, because that is used for other purpose, and how we can introduce an effective conservation regime in that place. There are interesting developments like the Trifino Biosphere Reserve in Latin America. 3 countries are working together with a new big investment package, 11 million euro from Germany, to help the 3 countries to work together. We are also dealing with the site that has a political sensitivity, and like the map workshop in Tokyo that we bring the Russian and the Japanese scientists through IUCN map workshop to talk about this dispute, the Southern Korea and the 4 northern islands between Russia and Japan. You know how many islands now is under the contest, and I hope that after all, the map and UNESCO is serving for the purpose of peace building, that if some of the cases that we can work it out, that to find a mutual and win-win solution, that I think that would be great contribution. The demilitarized zone, DMZ, in the North Korea and between North and South Korea has been proposed actually officially by South Korea as a biosphere reserve, which was declined because the North Korean didn't agree. But one day, this will work. And this, I think, for the map, we must make a very clear notion for that. Conservation for peace, for solidarity. In Haiti, in the post-conflict country, we also have the new biosphere in the development. I will skip the rest because it is about the urban issues, rural-urban integration, climate change impact using biosphere reserve, particular UNESCO HP map has been working to see some of the typical cases of what happening on the glaciers, and these are some major biosphere reserves are involved. In fact, in the COP meetings this year, next year, we will make some exhibitions for that. But the whole thing of the map of research agenda is a partnership issue, that how we can effectively bring all the key players, actors, and stakeholders into one place. And of course, in Sweden, I think, I hope the map council have the message, especially for the young generations, young people, to come on board. And I confess that I think for MAP program, we haven't get enough support for the young people to do the research, to do the practice work, and so we have to devise the new ways, a new partnership for that. And then the whole notion of resilience, and what I mentioned before, this probably we can ajouter a bit kind of a rebuild, redesign that as a kind of extension of that concept. Now conclusion, actually not yet. We're just at the beginning of this discussion of the new ideas for the research agenda. But in you're hoping that in this biosphere reserve, I hope that we can make significant progress. And then in 1 or 2 years' time, we will have a new, fresh agenda that launched for future cooperation. Thank you for your. Thank you for.